Hello everyone, this is day, I don't know, of this journey. It'll probably be in the description somewhere, but today, I'm pretty excited for this video. I'm going to be explaining, or at least consolidating my knowledge on the value proposition of Bitcoin and why, and the kind of the philosophy behind it and why there is actually value to be had in this future technology, which I think is going to be revolutionary. So yeah, pretty excited to share all my research that I've combined throughout a few months of just looking at lectures, um, looking at podcasts, and all of that from experts in the field that have a lot to say about blockchain technology and what Bitcoin itself has to offer. So yeah, I guess let's just get right into it. This is a 17-year-old trying to explain Bitcoin. So first of all, we have the first point, I guess, is that we have to kind of introduce what Bitcoin is, and it's basically a decentralized, permissionless system that basically has a model where it relies on something called time-stamped append-only logs. And what this is basically each block in the blockchain is, I guess, it's stamped with a time, and that time is immutable. And each block cannot be changed after it's been created. So that creates a blockchain. Sorry, my mask is falling down, but that creates a blockchain whereby you're not able to actually change the past. So once it's been set, it's set in stone. And what that allows is that it's immutable, so you don't have to depend on anyone for it. And so there's no counterparty risk. So there's no one, say, with gold, you would have to trust a central bank to hold your gold. Whereas in this, there's no counterparty risk. It's just you and code connecting you from the other person that you're transacting with. So that's kind of Bitcoin in a very, very small nutshell that I've tried to condense all the complex code at hash rates, functions, all of that stuff into this tiny introduction. And so the way, however, that it creates these new blocks is to decide, well, first of all, who gets to decide those new blocks, right? And those would be the miners. So what happens is every, I think, 12.5 minutes, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 12.5 minutes, around there, a new block is created, and that block has a block reward, which miners want to solve for. And so then a miner that correctly solves this thing called a function, I think it uses elliptic curve, some sort of way to generate a function that a computer has to solve, and basically the first one to solve that gets the right to create that next block. And that's how, in this decentralized system where you don't have to trust anyone, that's how consensus is reached regarding the record of transactions. So yeah, that's kind of the immutability side, and how it really cannot be changed after the block has already been created. And so number two, that brings me to point number two, I guess, and it's incorruptible. So because it's fixed by code, and the consensus mechanism, which is mining, doesn't rely on one central party doing it, it's hard for it to be corrupted. So say we have never in history in the world have had a resource, that has not been able to be produced more of. So if we think back to when people used seashells as currency, when we started being able, because they were used because they were scarce. But when we increased our technological capacity to be able to find more or produce more, I think it was, then that obviously would have devalued the seashells that someone already had, which would basically mean that whoever found the new technology to mine it to be able to produce more seashells, I guess, would win in the long run. I saw this interesting thing where in Africa they used glass pellets, and what the people from, I think it was Britain, when they came over to Africa, they actually knew how to create those glass pellets at a cheaper cost. So what they would do is, because it's basically money in another continent, they could just make as many as they could and then ship them over, and then basically devalue the African's currency. And so that basically means, like, in Bitcoin terms, this thing cannot be changed. It's fixed by code. So the inflation rate is constantly decreasing every 4 years. It gets halved. It's called the halving event, which I'm sure some of you may have heard of. But that's where the inflation rate of the currency for each block, the mining reward, gets cut in half. And basically what that means is we've actually already mined 90% of the supply of Bitcoin. And so there's only 10% and 10%. And 10% has to be mined over the next, I think, all the way until 2040 is when the last Bitcoin block reward will be mined. So that we have a long way to go and not so much supply left, which means that since it's fixed by code, that it's constantly going to be just slightly inflationary, and you don't have to trust someone else to, I guess, trust someone else with the risk of them being able to produce more of it. So yeah, and to go to the mining side of things, to be able to create or change the code of Bitcoin, you'll need 51% of people using the blockchain to come to consensus. So that would require around that would be like, it's called a 51% attack. And that's when 51% of the GPUs are, hypothetically, this is a hypothetical situation where if someone controlled 51% of the GPUs mining Bitcoin, then they could change the code. However, that's proven to be unlikely, and it hasn't happened since its inception. And since then, block mining has become exponentially harder, because what the function does is that the more blocks you mine, the more hash power you have, so the more computing power you use, the harder the function gets. And the code will basically base that off and adjust the difficulty to make sure that each block is mined within that time. So it'll adjust to the difficulty of how much computing power there is. So yeah, that's how Bitcoin can't be corrupted. And then so now we have a value dot point, I guess, which is Metcalfe's law. So basically what this dictates is that the value of a network is basically derived from the exponential increase that each new user brings to that network. So say if 7 billion people were on, to just illustrate this exponential increase, say if you have one person on a network and another person joins, that's 2 people on a network. That's 2 connections. But then if you scale that all the way to 7 billion, and then a 7 billion and first person comes onto that network, then what happens is that person can now make 7 billion new connections. So with each person, they're making an exponential number of higher connections. And so that's how the value proposition of Bitcoin works, is that the more people are on the network, the more value it accrues. And so that's, I guess, where you can derive the Bitcoin value from. But I think the philosophy behind it is also a pretty interesting point that I really want to mention as well. And that basically is that I heard this from this guy called Robert Breedlove on a podcast on Tom Bilyeu's channel, Bilyew. I've mentioned him a few times. I think he's really great. But yeah, he basically in this thing, Robert basically mentions the perfect money. And so it has to have these 5 attributes and be able to perform them the best. And to him and to me, because I think he's convinced me of this, but to me, Bitcoin fulfills those 5 attributes to the T. So what they are divisibility. So what you can do is, say you can have a $100 note with the fiat system. So we're talking about US dollar, Aussie dollar. You have a $100 note, and you also have a $1 coin or note, or 20-cent note, or $20. And basically what that means is that it's divisible. So it's still worth the same, but it can be split into smaller parts. So then you can buy things of like smaller value. Like, for example, you could use $100 notes to buy an iPad, but maybe you wouldn't use that to buy like groceries, for example. And so yeah, it's divisible. So Bitcoin can be divided into 100, I think it's 10 million Satoshis. And so those Satoshis are each worth 1/10 millionth or 100 millionth, I think, of a Bitcoin. And so, and even if one Satoshi maybe becomes like worth a car or something, eventually you could, if everyone agrees to it, a soft fork can happen, which would be able to denominate Satoshis in maybe something else, like what cents are to dollars. So in that way, Bitcoin is infinitely divisible. It's also durable as well, so it can't be destroyed. So, well, destroyed as in like it cannot deteriorate. So say with gold, for example, it was used as a currency for so long because gold essentially has a half-life that is extremely low. So what it would do is it wouldn't deteriorate over a long period of time. So it wouldn't matter. So it wouldn't, I guess, deteriorate, and so it would lose its, like, so your money wouldn't basically evaporate into ashes, basically, is what it's saying. And then, so, number 3, for the third characteristic, we have portability. So that's basically how you're able to transfer your whatever currency you're using to and fro. So with Bitcoin, you can move billions across continents in seconds or minutes. But with gold or something, gold is very like dense and so it's very heavy, and so it's really hard to transport. And not to mention that there's also a lot of legal things you have to go through to change custody of gold because it's such a valuable asset. And so in that way, gold is inferior to Bitcoin as a form of money. And then fourth, we have scarcity. So I'll often be, just a side note, I'll often be making these connections from Bitcoin to gold because that's often what they're compared to, and they're kind of all competing for the same thing, which is a hedge against the insane money printing machines of the Federal Reserve and be able to retain its value, its purchasing power. And so with the fourth characteristic, we have scarcity, which is basically how scarce the resource is. So making sure that, that there will only ever be a limited quantity and it won't be able to get overinflated like those African glass pellets were all those centuries ago. So in that case, it's fixed by code. So this comes back to the incorruptibility. So it's fixed by code. So it's trustless. You don't have to trust the system. You don't have to put trust in someone else, and you can avoid counterparty risk that way. So there's no third party that you have to watch out for when you're transacting between someone. So it's just you and that person, and the system moderates basically the transaction. And so in that way, Bitcoin is superior to gold. And then so finally, we have the fifth term, which is fungibility. And fungibility is basically, I guess, fungibility is, let's see. Let's actually get up the real definition because I feel like it'll be important. But fungibility is, to be fungible is that it's able to be replaced by another item. Okay, so I kind of forgot there, but it can be basically replaced. So it's like if you have a $100 note and I have a $100 note, we can swap those $100 notes, and it's not like the value is going to change. So in that way, one Bitcoin is always one Bitcoin, and it's not like those Bitcoins are different, right? And that's in that way. I think Bitcoin and gold are both good in that sense, but yeah, Bitcoin just does all the other characteristics in such a better way that it makes it basically the ideal money that you want to transact with. So lastly, we have, so basically this is what I kind of learned recently, which is where it can be used as a safe investment for companies to use instead of cash reserves. So usually companies will buy bonds or have cash around the side just to have like a safety net in case their company goes like under for a period of time. So instead of holding that, they can hold Bitcoin basically, and what that'll do is that it'll keep increase because gold is not as popular of an alternative. So holding Bitcoin will actually increase your purchasing power in real terms, and it won't be inflated away like the fiat currency is or like your cash is. So the central bank can't just print money out infinitely and devalue your Bitcoin, because one Bitcoin is always one Bitcoin, right? And so, yeah, that is also where value can be derived from, I guess, especially for multinational corporations, which, if you didn't know, they basically control all the financial markets. So it's pretty important that we get them on board as well if we want huge money to come into Bitcoin and to be able to have it seen as a legitimate technology of the future. So yeah, I'm seeing this video. It's around 14 minutes and 30 seconds. I don't know, I tend to ramble, but I feel like I did cover all the good points of why Bitcoin, I strongly believe actually is the technology of the future and why I'm so heavily invested in it. And so yeah, if you enjoyed, give it a like and subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you guys for tomorrow's daily vlog. It'll be back to the usual. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and see yous.